Good morning and Ellargu Namaskara. Thank you to Dr. Nayak and others for inviting me to this very eminent gathering of educationists. And I must tell you, I mean, apart from my more recent foray into politics, I have been, the only job I know to do is as an educationist, as a teacher, as a researcher. And that's really been a very, very fulfilling profession for me. And I'm sure I'm here with so many others who are in the same, in the same broad zone and making a difference to their own learning and to the advancement of knowledge amongst their students, making life better for everyone. Okay, so some of you, I think, were there at the last time I presented some version of this talk. It's good to see you all. But fundamentally, as a nation, we are now at the cusp of tremendous change. And the change is happening in different ways. One aspect, of course, is through government policy. A very different vision is being offered as we move into the 21st century. And at the same time, we're also seeing changes in the nature of technology, in the rise of edtech unicorns and things that we would never have really imagined. And of course, one of the challenges that we often were concerned about, I'll allude to that again in the talk, is about whether these changes are opening the doors for both excellence but also access. Is it, are these changes working in a manner that it takes everybody along, or are we once again going to create a situation where some people do better and many others fall behind? When we think back to the Constitution, the promise that's embedded there in the preamble, we the citizens of India promised ourselves equality of status and of opportunity, right? Opportunity is that, educational opportunity is that available to everyone. Anyway, now when we discuss the national education policy, which is what I'm going to do over the next 15-20 minutes, if you think I'm moving too fast, please someone raise your hand and say slow down. But nonetheless, the basic point is that the national education policy has come in for tremendous amount of praise, and I have no problems with any of that. I'm perfectly happy, but I'm also a person whose job is, as an opposition politician, to keep looking at, okay, is everything correct? Are there flaws? Are there challenges? Let me identify them in a constructive manner, and let's make sure that you understand that these are constructive, that they are aimed at ensuring that if you have this vision, please make sure that you take into account all the other dimensions that need to be taken into account to make this vision a reality, right? So if we want to think about, I will not be spending too much detailed time on each slide. There is a lot of content, but fundamentally, the first thing is that the rollout is happening from last year, or in fact even a little earlier, to 2040, over 2 decades, right? And many things have to fall into place over time. For example, curriculum standards. I think right now there is movement on that front. Multiple committees have been set up. I think Dr. Kasturi Rangan has once again been roped in. And there are many people who question that because they say, of course, he's a space scientist, but not an educationist. So what's the connection? Anyway, but he's, even when our government was there, we had appointed him to the Planning Commission. So he's seen as a model of excellence, and that itself is a very good thing. Anyway, so we have a massive timeline that needs to be followed. And if some of these are not adhered to, then the overall plan will not necessarily work in the manner as envisioned, okay? So that's one part. But just to highlight the main thrust of the NEP, the first is that public spending on education to be at 6% of GDP, right? Okay, I was part of the Congress manifesto, and we also put this down. We had similar 3% of GDP for healthcare, but no government actually goes out there and allocates anything close to these kinds of resources in the public sector. There is a lot of money spent on education, and but 6% of GDP is a very, very far away goal. Anyway, I don't think I should really emphasize any of these things, but there are two, three things that I've highlighted here. One is early childhood education through Anganwadis. Another, of course, is the creation of school complexes. And on the higher education side, multidisciplinary institutions, 4-year undergraduate degree with exit options every year, and of course, consolidation of higher educational institutions. So I'm just highlighting these. I'll go through some more as we move forward. But the basic point is that there are lots of changes here, okay? And the real worry is that, it's very nice to make these promises, but we are all, we talk about India being poised to encash a demographic dividend. For that to happen, then, every year that we don't educate and empower and upskill our students, our youth, we are creating trouble for them and for us. As policymakers, we worry that if you have a large number of youngsters who say, what happened to our future, that you'll see, protests and rallies and what else. Anyway, the only issue is that there were many procedural challenges. There was a committee that was first formed under Subramaniam, and then that whole report was not released. And, those of us who were in Parliament, I was also on the HRD committee, and we want to engage with this issue, go into it in more detail, and we were not really given much of a chance. Then suddenly it came out, and without really the kind of open, extensive consultations that we would have liked. So the first question, of course, is where are the resources going to come from? And just to point out that actually over the last few years, the budgeted amount of money for the funds for education has been falling. Now, the overall education budget in 2014 was 4.14% of the budget, not of the national wealth, not of GDP. Okay, it's come down to 3.3%, and now, after the pandemic, it looks like in the last year it would have been cut even further, right? So if this is the case, then the promise, the reality, with the lack of funding will make a huge difference to what we can actually accomplish. Okay, so these are things that can be remedied. It's just a real challenge. If we say that this is going to be met, it's public funding, it's center and states. Well, tell me and show me which states are flourishing, which states have the kind of budgets that are required. The states do spend a lot on education, mostly on teacher salaries and things like that, and are constantly facing deficits, and it's going to be hard for them to raise the resources. On the other hand, if it's going to come from the private pockets of families, then, ultimately education is a merit good. It's an obligation that we owe our children, and it's not something that we should be forcing families to shell out for, and that would create inequalities of a very different kind. Frankly, already, I think all of us have seen this, and if we are in this room, we've been on one side of that divide. Probably by the age of 3, children's futures are set in stone. The kind of school that their parents send them to, and the kind of opportunities that follow through from that, whatever choices are made, what kind of schools people can afford, and so that's something that we have to really think about, because we are so caught up with the competition and and the ranks that are published on the front page of the papers that we fail to see what we're doing to the overall society. Okay. So this is the other issue, right? When we talk about privatization, I have no problems whatsoever with more people offering education and having more institutions, public, private, non-profit, whatever. Philosophically, I feel that we need more institutions. Any way in which we can create them, that's perfectly fine. But what is happening, though? Like I was saying, about which school your parents send you to makes a difference. So a lot of poor people, okay, who have come to the city and are working as auto rickshaw drivers, and the mothers are working in multiple households, are all going to spend a big chunk of their resources to send their kids to school. And they say, we'll send them to convent school, private school, English medium schools, which charge quite a lot of money, right? Okay, so when that happens, what is the end result? Once again, you have a situation where if the school does not deliver on the quality that it has been promising, then these people are going to go through so much difficulty and not have much to show at the end of it, right? So that's one of the things that we need to regulate. We need to make sure that standards are delivered at every level. Then, of course, this, I won't dwell on it because I don't want to politicize the event, but the point is we are talking about Indian values. What are Indian values? Okay? Some years ago, our Prime Minister had said that those people who clean the sewage do it because they see it as their, as a choice that they enjoy doing, right? I don't think that's the case, right? So we need to be very clear what is Indian values, and we should have open consultations about these sorts of issues so that we choose the best of Indian values, not those that are regressive. That's all. I won't go further there. But anyway, I've already been dwelling on disadvantaged communities. Now, there is already, we are now into the 75th year of independence, and there is a general sense that, that many things that should have happened over time, including different affirmative action kinds of programs, have served their purpose, and why are we continuing with many of those? But the truth of the matter is, if you actually look at disadvantaged communities, basically they are going to face lots of challenges, and that you just have to get out of, in the cities, of course, in the slums, you can still see the challenges. But of course, if you just go to 50 kilometers outside and start to see the quality of education and opportunities, you start to see who has access and who does not. Okay? And this doesn't even have to do with caste or anything. It can also apply in the context of gender, right? Because, there's a lot of challenges as you progress through school and educational levels, you start to see more gender divides in terms of dropouts, etc. Now, so we need to come up with various programs. For example, it could be providing bicycles to girls to go to school, which may be a few kilometers away from the village where they did their primary education. Do we have adequate hostels? Do we have adequate bathrooms for women and girl children? All these sorts of things are going to be challenges, and we need to continue to pay attention to them, because otherwise the same historic disadvantages will be perpetuated even into the future. Okay. And of course, this is, another contentious issue, which has to, which deals with, the kinds of programs that we put in place in the Constitution itself, where we said up front, while we said we're all equal, we also said that we recognize that certain groups have been discriminated against, exploited, and are disadvantaged, and that to overcome those millennia of disadvantage, that we will provide opportunities in education, in employment, government employment, in parliament and political representation, those sorts of things. So this discussion is not very detailed in the NEP. We want to know what happens to many of these programs. And basically, there is a talk about merit, and I'm all for merit. I have no problems with that. I'm here as a merit student myself. But the basic point is the definition we need to think through in a much more careful manner. Is a young girl who is a first-generation learner in a village school without access to coaching or anything like that, and she gets, say, 85%. And everyone who is admitted, is people from cities. Multiple generations have been educated. They've gone through coaching classes, and they get 95%. Who is more meritorious, right? These are all questions that we need to think about. And there have been proposals many years ago, probably about 15 years ago. Yogendra Yadav and Satish Deshpande, who's a sociology professor in Delhi University, they came up with an alternative proposal for access. They said, look, if people are worried about caste-related reservations, because that perpetuates some other aspects which are not so good in a modern society, they said, look, you can just change the whole approach to who gets access to reservations and who doesn't. And they proposed a weightage. They said 80% of the score should be given for your exam marks, whatever those might be. And the remaining 20%, they suggested, should be allocated based on your parents' background, the kind of school you studied in, right? If you, JNU, Jawaharlal Nehru University, has something on those lines. They have something called deprivation points, where they actually look at where you're coming from, which region, what your background is, and they give you some weightage in the admission process. Because many people have struggled that much harder, and we need to recognize that as well. So something like this, if they said that 80-20 would actually ensure that a lot more people who would otherwise be left out under current circumstances would actually have a chance to pick up and move forward, okay? So these are all ways of thinking differently without the labels that cause many of us to go into one camp or the other when we react to these issues. Anyway, so, and when we talk about private education, right? These reservations that are available for disadvantaged communities are there in government schools, government institutions, not in private. And so if there is even more domination of private, what happens to all these communities and their access? That's one of the things. This is a matter, of course, that, there's some mixed issues. 20 years ago, we were very, very worried about multiple digital divides in India. What do we mean by this? We meant, by that we meant that very few people had access to computers and the world of online anything, or especially today, education, right? Okay. Now, one other divide was everything was mostly in English, and again, a large number of people are not fluent or conversant enough in English to get the best out of that. So some of these divides have been lessened in India over time, thankfully, partly because there is content in multiple languages, but more than that, the internet and data, India has been remarkably successful in lowering the costs, and so a lot more people have access, okay? And nowadays, you don't need a computer or laptop, you can have access through a smartphone. But smartphones are limited in their penetration. Then if during the lockdown, one of the features that we noticed was that if there is one smartphone in the family, then the boy children would get access to that and not the girls. Okay, so there are multiple, impacts that are out there that we need to consider. And if we want to make sure that the promise of online and new frontiers would actually work out in a manner that is providing equal access, equal opportunity. Funnily enough, there were programs called Operation Digital Board. 25 crores was allocated for that in 2019-20, sorry, and only zero was spent. Okay, so they're idealistic, but they're not practically implemented, and that's really a challenge. Okay, so this is another thing that we need to think about. Okay, now this. Again, too much content here, but in the neighboring state, Tamil Nadu, there's already a lot of, anguish about the NEET exam, which is one major entrance exam for medical entrance and other things. And, and if you go to Rajasthan, there's a town called Kota, which, the whole, not the whole, but a substantial portion of the economy consists of students who are enrolled in these coaching centers with the aim of breaking into some medical or engineering or professional course, right? Now, the attitudes that we want to inculcate in the new education policy versus the Indian style of studying for the entrance exam, there's a huge mismatch between, acquiring knowledge and the critical thinking and everything else that goes with it, and just finding a way to crack the exam to get into the next place. Okay, so these are all challenges that we need to figure out, and if we have more and more of emphasis on this, then we will not escape the quota syndrome. Okay, that's what I mean, K-O-T-A. Okay, then of course, this is the other challenge. I don't know how practical these are, right? If you go to smaller towns, there will be one organization that is set up commerce college, a college for girls, something like that, right? And the NEP mandates that in a few years' time, every one of these standalone colleges must become a multidisciplinary university, either alone or by merging with others, right? Now, this merging with others is a little bit of a challenge because these organizations have been set up by philanthropists, people committed to education, who want to make some kind of a difference. And suddenly you say, okay, here this institution is doing better, you hand it over and move on. That's hardly the way to go about it. And some institutions probably would find it so much better to specialize in just one particular domain. So I'm not sure that this has been very well thought through. And, what we are seeing, of course, is that those institutions that we started to give autonomy, they have developed multiple disciplines, multiple innovative degrees, and they have been fulfilling this particular goal. But there are lots and lots of institutions which I don't think will be able to get there. And if we shut them down, then we are, removing whatever access there is in these smaller towns, and making it that much harder for people there to get access. And we don't want just one kind of higher educational institution. We want to have many, many different kinds of flowers blooming in that garden. Okay. There's another major innovation is this 4-year degree, okay, and with the ability to pick up multiple kinds of, to mix and match credits and courses from different disciplines to create, on one solid base, you get a chance to create and fine-tune your own educational pathway. All that's fantastic. And in order to allow people the flexibility to, if they're not able to continue for a 3 or 4 year degree, they give them the flexibility of, okay, you can stop after 1 year with a certificate, after 2 years with a diploma, after 3 years with basic degree, and after 4 years with a degree that allows you to go on to higher education. Now, this is all fine, but, these certifications, how are they going to be organized? How are you going to pool the basic credit that you can get from different institutions? And one of the challenges for every institution is that if you're trying to tailor your educational offering for people who will drop out in 1 year, who will drop out in 2 years, who will drop out in 3 years, then you have to start thinking in different ways. In the first year itself, how much can you give them so that they are reasonably equipped with some foundation to be viable in the workplace, those sorts of things. But more than that, I'm more concerned about, I actually use the word dropout, right? Why do I use that word? For the simple reason, this has the problem of those who are poor, the parents telling them, okay, you've got your certificate, you've got your diploma, go out there and work. Sean, keep me going. Go out there and work. And many of them may not find it easy to come back. And so we are actually creating pathways for people to drop out earlier and easily, and they might find it very difficult to come back. Further, there's a lot of centralization, and in the original draft, there was something called a Rashtriya Shiksha Ayog, headed by the Prime Minister, and so these are all contentious issues. It's not clear that we want one model for everybody, or whether we want to have multiple competing models. And the worry is that if everything is centralized, then different states and their needs and their concerns may or may not be addressed. Okay. Then, this is the same, we just need to make sure that there are multiple checks and balances so that, that we will sort of really allow different viewpoints to flourish. Now, one of the things that I really learned from and enjoyed and benefited from when I was in the US was the kind of competitive grants that were available through something called the National Science Foundation, okay? So the US research ecosystem basically involves there will be something like a National Science Foundation. National Research Foundation is modeled on that. And what the organization does, it says, look, we ask for proposals for interesting projects which you want to undertake under different headings. It could be in different branches of science, different branches of humanities, and the ideas come from the professors, the researchers themselves. They're not being dictated from above. Sometimes you will have, a special agenda. They may say, Human Genome Project, we're going to work on something related to that, and then that is setting a national agenda in a particular direction. That's fine. And then these proposals are peer-reviewed by, juries of outstanding professors from various subjects, and a lot of new ideas bubble up without being dictated to, from the center, from a government also. So this is the sort of thing. And then you get, you get the grant, you work on the research, you regularly report on how you're progressing, you present your paper at academic conferences, then there is a whole journal ecosystem, which is not a shortcut, which is again very rigorous, and everything goes through peer review. So there's a whole ecosystem that generates this research mindset, outlook, and output. And that's something there's no shortcuts towards that. We have to put in a lot of effort to create that out here. In India, on the other hand, I've seen there have been times when, as soon as you say you need to have a PhD for a promotion, then immediately people will be looking at, this is a broad and generalization, there will be some people who will be looking for shortcuts and plagiarizing PhD reports, theses and things like that. There will be all kinds of journals that emerge just to give people a publication, and they may even charge you for that. So this is we don't want rackets. We want to cultivate a culture of research, and that's something that's not difficult at all. It actually takes some effort. I was a gold medalist in Bangalore University when I went to America, and my first paper at the Wharton School came back with the comments, this is very well written and organized, but where's your opinion? I said, well, nobody's ever asked me for my opinion before. It's very well written and organized, because I would always look at the last 5 years exam questions and prepare, 2-3 textbooks, 2-3 guidebooks, prepare very detailed answers, and go out there and do very well, right? That's what we were taught to do. Not that I wasn't interested in learning more, but then, the culture was such that we wanted to enjoy life along with all this, right? Okay, so this was the attitude. That is the problem, right? So we have to change that. We have to start encouraging people to, if they say, what can I research? Well, every single thing around us is worth researching. There are problems, there are challenges, there are stories to be written. You can talk to many of the people who are going to get given awards here, and just by conducting a study of all of them and how they made a difference, you will have some insights that probably could be published somewhere, right? I'm just saying that there's no shortage of meaningful and impactful research opportunities, and certainly in the Indian context. And so we just need to have that mindset, right? And so that's the sort of thing. Anyway, the draft NEP had a statement which said, only the government can have the perspective to drive the research that will result in innovations that will facilitate economic growth. Okay, I don't think it's there in the final version, thankfully, but the basic point is, research by definition requires competition of ideas, okay? Not just one mandated approach. Yeah, and in certain applied areas, you need to be connected to markets and to whatever else is going on in the real world. So all those things, it's better not to be, go back to dictated by the government. As I mentioned, there can be. You can say, educational technology for the masses or something like that. And so there have been initiatives like Swayam, and a few other platforms that are out there. But to make everything that is eligible for these grants to fit in with a certain set of politically determined priorities is a limited way of going about things. Okay? And there's also this other issue of foreign universities. Okay, now I have benefited from some of the best foreign universities. And by the way, I must mention to you that my father is just the second graduate from his village. My uncle was the first. Uncle became a union minister and founder of the dairy movement, Mr. M.V. Krishnappa. And my father, M.V. Venkatappa, was Speaker of the Assembly. But I managed to go to Wharton, which is the world's best, one of the best business schools, and my brother went to Harvard. So that's the kind of mobility that's possible with education in one generation. Okay, and what I'm trying to say is, when we went there, we realized that these, in the United States certainly, it's not just these top institutions. There are probably 100, world-class institutions, probably in more limited domains. For example, Oklahoma, where I taught, was not, anywhere in the Ivy League at all. But when it came to certain domains, like meteorology, that is tornado country, or petroleum engineering, that's also petroleum country, they were world-class in terms of the faculty that they had. So that's also something that we need to think about. Different areas, different regions, how do you cater to the strengths of your region and still be world-class in whatever way you go. But the other fact of the matter is that in India, what we've seen is that quality faculty are actually very few. And this possibly goes to quality leadership, quality management. And, my daughter goes to a new university called Ashoka outside of Delhi. And, while we were very happy to send her there because they had outstanding faculty, somebody pointed out to me that those faculty were all poached from government universities that had nurtured them all these years, okay, which is true because they were from Delhi University or JNU or somewhere else. And so they, in some sense, the better offers from the private university have left the government public system unable to cope and unable to retain the talent that even they need, that their students deserve. So there are all these complexities. And these are also issues that once foreign universities come in, as I said, they will bring in, just like foreign companies came in here and gave us opportunity to really learn best practices and compete with them, we will also learn a tremendous amount. But what it will do to the available pool of quality faculty, and management and staff and everything else is really something to think through as well. We need to figure out ways to transform that whole pool of people becoming teachers, researchers, scholars, etc. Okay, and so those sorts of things. Just one or two last points before I close. We want to help our children get early childhood education, and we want to start with the Anganwadis, right? Now, unfortunately, the Anganwadi workers are some of the least paid in the country. They're not trained for education per se, and there's talk about a 6-month online program which will train them, etc. I mean, I'm very happy that we'll have more people employed in every village, but the point is, basically the amounts that they're paid, monthly honorarium, is 4,500 rupees, 2,250 rupees, these sorts of things. One Anganwadi worker to 50 students, how much attention can they pay, right? I mean, so there are lots and lots of practical issues that we again need to pay attention to, and we need to think about how to compensate these people better, okay? And so that's one of the other issues. Vocational education, is similar concerns to the one I had about, this 4-year degree and multiple pathways out of those degrees. Why do I say that? Because if you do, and this is actually very, very crucial to teach people vocational skills. Over the decades or the centuries, we have focused on brain power rather than working with our hands, okay? And as a result, our crafts, knowledge, a lot of these things are dying out. And that's a huge loss of wisdom or traditional wisdom. The worry is that if you go back to these things, these kinds of vocational training opportunities, then will people who were in those traditional occupations, somehow find themselves forced back into them rather than breaking out into other kinds of modern, occupations which are a breakaway from their traditional caste or other occupational backgrounds. Okay, and will this result in more of them being asked to drop out, etc. Okay, and so basically, there are just lots and lots of issues with teachers. There are large numbers of contractual teachers who are not paid properly, who are not, who are not integrated. And, so how do you, there is a lot of effort being put in here about how do you improve teacher training and how do you integrate teacher training with practical education, etc. How do we get rid of those, teacher diploma factories and all the rackets that exist? I was also a member of the board of the National Council for Teacher Education, so we've been working on this for some time. And, but basically, again, how we encourage our teachers, how we respect them, how we give them an opportunity to really, transform and flourish and pursue the dharma of the teacher is something amazing, right? We want to make everyone who comes before us much better than who we are. We take whatever we've learned and we want to convey that, right? I mean, we want them to flower and flourish. So that's the sort of thing that we need to put a lot more effort into. And so we need to not see them as people who are trying to buck the system, but actually people that we need to invest in and help flourish. Okay, language is another contentious issue, but we need to figure out how are we going to balance English, which is globally competitive, with native language learning and everything else that goes along with it. Okay, and some other practical issues. School clusters is good. You want to take advantage of the facilities available in multiple schools in a region and have different ones of them, specialize in, one in sports facilities, one in something else. But how does this work practically? Please think through and try it out and then mandate it for the rest of the country. Okay, so that's the sort of thing. There's a lot of other stuff to figure out, but let's, in the spirit of transforming the world for the better, let's all work to fix these problems and make the new national education policy work in the best possible manner for all of us and for our fellow Indians. Thank you very much.